I have like the kind of fundamentals and principles of the way I understand Bitcoin in my head, which has kind of altered the way I see the world and how things have come to be in this way because of fiat incentives. And I can then try and reverse, using you as an engineer, reverse engineer it in my head, what that is for me to learn from in order to, understand a little bit more about how it plays out. So it's one of those fascinating, it's not a hobby. It's kind of like, it just becomes a new lens that you don't want to take off, because when you have that lens in front of you, you are confronted with the reality, and reality is not always comfortable to see. Some of the things you just want to sort of take your sort of like lens, your Bitcoin lens off, and just like be that guy in the Matrix, eating the steak as if he's eating the real thing. But you're like lying to yourself, right? You're kind of, and I did that maybe last year. I had to take the lens off a little bit because I wanted to eat a bit of steak in the fiat world. But it does trap you quite quickly and easily. It's easy to fall back into it because, everyone's doing the same thing at the same pace. You're familiar with the environment that people are trying to survive in, and you just slot right back in. So you've got to remain a little bit sort of like conscious and not overload your, proof of work, like over leverage your energy, I suppose, in Bitcoin, because you need to understand that you're still in a fiat world and there's still a fiat demand, and you've got to find balance, and that's not always easy to do.
Hello guys, welcome once again to Bitcoiner Podcast. Today is a special week. Today is the conference here in Barcelona. So it's going to be really great. We're going to stream like between 5 to 6 hours. Hopefully you're going to see this great. But we have 2 great days here in Barcelona. I hope that you have enjoyed the conference in Warsaw. The guys from Bitcoin Film Fest gave everything. So I hope that you have enjoyed it. Also, I hope that you enjoyed Lawrence Lepard episode. I know it was huge insights. We talked a lot in 60 minutes. And he says that he's coming back in a future episode. But I hope you didn't like it. I hope that you have been reading his book, The Big Print. It's really insightful what's going on right now. And also, if you want to learn about macroeconomics and the history of the US. So anyways, today we have a great episode among everything that is going on here. But I want to welcome Ian. He's the host of Questioning Bitcoin. Welcome, man.
Hey, what's up, brother? How are you, man? First of all, well done with the whole Barcelona side, like the whole conference thing. This pleb organized conference, with all the sort of legends coming along and participating in the space. And Barcelona is a beautiful city. I love it. It's got the sort of modern city. It's got the old town. It's got a beach. It's just so vibrant and alive, and it's a good place to go to get pretty much anything you're seeking in terms of whether it's just relaxation or going out partying or participating in culture. It's a beautiful space. And when I first arrived there, I made the assumption that everyone spoke Spanish, but then I arrived at the airport and it's all Catalan. And I think that a lot of people don't realize that, they make that assumption. And that was surprising to me, because I was trying to polish my already rusty Spanish before I went, just to get the basics past. It just came as a little bit of a waste of time. And second of all, the Lawrence Lepard thing, he's really sort of blowing up at the moment, and quite rightly so. He's done a lot of proof of work with that book, The Big Print, and I've ordered my copy, and I'm really looking forward to delving into that. So yeah, that's all I've got to say.
Yeah,
and I've got my stereotypical British cup of tea with me. It looks like pond water, like I said to you before we recorded. But got to keep to the tradition, right?
I'm sure that it tastes better than what it seems.
It doesn't really taste that nice, to be honest.
Do you remind me of this episode of? Have you seen Ted Lasso?
Yeah, no, I've seen Ted Lasso. Yeah.
So there's an episode when the CEO of the what is the name of the team? I don't remember, but she says like, "Do you want a cup of
Is it
tea?"
the Greyhounds or something? Isn't it? Or no, the Richmond.
Yeah,
Yeah. Anyways,
yeah.
Ted Lasso.
And she says like, "Do you want a coffee?" And he drinks it and does because this like
He spits out on the side. Yeah, yeah.
That's so cool. Anyways, yeah, Leopard. It's his book is great. I read it in a week, and it was. I need to read it again because there's a lot of information. Actually, he says that, and this is an advice for everyone that wants to read the book. He even says that he of course has some test readers, and some of that says that the chapter, I think it's 11 and 12, if I'm not mistaken, that it's full on detail, that probably some people will feel it like it's overwhelming because of the vast quantity of information that is there.
Right.
But he says that you can skip it and you can read it later, so you can have the whole picture of the American history, because it doesn't affect at all to understand the message that he wants to share, right? So that's if you want to skip it, it's fine. Then that, because that's what I did. But I skipped that part, but now I want to read with all the information that is in the chapter 11 and 12.
You kind of want to dedicate your focus and attention just to really sort of dig into the intricacies of it, essentially, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because in those chapters, what happens, because I saw them, and what happened is that he made like a huge research. So the information of that research, it's a lot of graphics and information and everything. Right. But in the next episode is the conclusion of those things. So it's like if you want to go into details, you can read these chapters. But anyways, and yeah, Barcelona, I know it's Catalan culture, but also English. Yeah. Whenever I'm going to Madrid or other places, that's when I feel that I'm living in Spain. But here in Barcelona, I don't feel it, because most people speak in Catalan or English, but Spanish is English, quite. Yeah, it's really odd to speak Spanish. I just do it with my friends or family members.
The food in Barcelona is amazing as well. Like, the food is just divine. And what's your take on Brits abroad? Those British people that come over to Spain and just sort of like sit on the beach with their shorts that are too tight and too small, and get loads of lager and expect a full English breakfast at every pub that's called a Red Lion and all that sort of stuff. It's almost like an export of the UK in Spain. Probably. Less so in Barcelona, right? Because you go to places in some of the Spain resorts and it's just tailored for British people.
Yeah, like Mallorca, I think, for example.
Magaluf and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Anyway, and let's talk about your rabbit hole journey. That's why we're here. This is a Bitcoin podcast, and we're in the middle of the Bitcoin conference.
Oh yeah, we're on the Bitcoin podcast, aren't we?
So you can share a little bit about your background, and then we'll talk about questioning Bitcoin and a lot of topics to cover. But if you can share a little bit about your background. Man.
Yeah, man. Where should I start? Rabbit hole story or all that sort of stuff? That's the difficult thing, because obviously when I host rabbit hole stories, people struggle with this, and I empathize with it because I'm struggling with it now, as where to start with it, because Bitcoin is one of those things that it's the orange pill. It's like opens up your mind to all sorts of different avenues and rabbit holes, right? So it's difficult to really know when your journey actually began, even if it was before actually understanding what Bitcoin was, if that makes any sense. But if you were to take it in its pure form of like when I discovered Bitcoin, it was just in a moment of crisis, I suppose, where I needed to try and get back on my feet and reinvent myself after, a breakdown in my marriage. The plan I had in the future clearly wasn't going to happen. And all the disorientating chaos that came from it taught me that I needed to think less about what's happening 10 years' time. In a fiat environment. I didn't realize that was the thing I needed to work out, is because I didn't understand what fiat was. I didn't even know what money was in the way I understand it now. All I understood was that I need to, the way I saw it was get back to where I was before the breakup as quick as possible. So I wanted to sort of like run and sprint and sort of like get back quick to where I was before, just to try and sort of catch up to fulfill this, inconceivable potential future for security. But what I didn't like cognitively realize was that I was chasing, a depreciating, declining value of money, because, housing was going up in price all around the country, and it continues. So you're incentivized to try and, if you wanted the same or similar lifestyle you had that you built up when you first bought that house, you have to work harder and longer to get back to that same standard. So, in that panic, I was just I was seeking, different ways to spin up money. And I remembered a few years prior, someone was talking about buying all these sort of crypto coins, and I'd heard that he got quite lucky with it. So that just brought me on to Coinbase, blindly put in like £1,000 on the top 10 things, not even knowing what crypto was, just knowing that there were things that could go up in value, and hoping, wishing and praying that they did. And they were all doing ups and downs, changing from 10th to 13. And I was just like, what am I doing? So I started trying to look into it a little bit, found myself in all the toxic, YouTube channels about this coin to here, that coin to 100x. And, for somebody in my state where I'm like, shit, I could actually like get 10 times what I put in if I put it in this fucking toad bollock coin, let's pull it in and then hope for the best, and then see it going up, but then suddenly crashing, and you're like, shit. And then you start realizing, well, I need to understand a little bit more about what this stuff is. And that's what eventually led me to Bitcoin, is because obviously Bitcoin remained at number one consistently. And then I was sort of hearing but ignoring and not really taking it in, those little tweets that people were putting out at the time about only Bitcoin. I just thought it was like another sort of ploy, as the same as all the others. But the more I saw it and the more engagement I saw online, and thanks to obviously the Bitcoin ecosystem and their toxicity and then persistence at it, it triggered a little bit of curiosity for me to scratch a little bit behind the surface, to sort of listen to what they had to say further. So I started watching a little bit more Bitcoin orientated podcasts like this one, and then realized actually there's something different here, and there's more of a philosophical kind of meaning behind it. There's this one stands out amongst the rest, and then how it's like, then it starts to, once you take this next step, there's a sort of trickling and then a sudden realization that this is not what I thought it was, and that's what led me down that rabbit hole.
Wow. It's super concise. I love it. I noticed that you're a host, man, because you can condense everything. But wow, that's a powerful story. And I agree with you, that one of the things that made me realize about Bitcoin, what's different from everything else, is also the values, and also, also when I was involved with the shitcoin space, that it was also remaining the first one. But before starting on Bitcoin, I was working for a shitcoin company. And I remember that when we do the conference and everything, one of the things that, besides all the developments that they tried to do and everything, and compete against Bitcoin, whatever, one of the things that was constantly that we spoke about, it was like, it was in terms of like a company, like how much money can we do if we provide this technology, blah, 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 blah. And when you go to a Bitcoin conference and a meetup, they never speak about money. They were saying like, all right, how can we do this technology better in order to improve the electricity, the energy grid? So there's way beyond, and the philosophical topics is quite different. One is just businesses and how to make money, and the other one is like, how we can do the world better, right? So I was like,
yeah, right. Totally.
So I was like, all right, I don't like this, I want this. And that's little by little when I was pivoting to Bitcoin as well. Yeah. And
was there like a moment where you sort of like had that flip? Because like, it's hard to sort of really remember back to be like, what was the trigger really, that to make that step, because it is kind of like hard to grasp once you start sort of getting into it. Was there like a moment in that story where you realized, or was it just sort of like it just occurred naturally for you?
For me,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think it occurred naturally because what. So the thing is that it's super funny in the timings when I discovered Bitcoin, because I'm an engineer, so I studied a little bit about blockchain, and we saw a little bit about Bitcoin, but in terms of how the blockchain is used to manage information and data, right? But it's all technology, actually. So I was like, all right, I think it's part of the culture of engineering and how to know another way to manage stuff, but I didn't pay attention of it. But that was the first time that I heard about Bitcoin. But then, fast forward a couple of years later, my sister also don't live in El Salvador anymore. She was living in Australia back then, I think. But then she came to Barcelona, and my parents were in El Salvador, so we had a conversation. We catch up like once a week or something, and we were in a call with my dad. And my sister said, I don't even remember how to start the conversation, but she says like something like, in Australia, Bitcoin is super popular because of this, because of that, and everyone has different stories, examples that she gave. But then what got me curious that my dad also knew about Bitcoin, and he's a pediatrician, he's a doctor, he's not involved at all at finance, right? And he knew about Bitcoin, but he's a smart guy. I mean, he wants to invest money, to have his nest egg, and to have something for his retirement, etc., right? I was like, all right, here's something. And then I start talking with my sister a little bit more, and funny enough, like a couple months or a year later, we start hearing about El Sante, how it's going popular. And then a few months later, we start hearing about the rumors that Bukele wanted to make Bitcoin legal tender. And we were like, all right, something's going on back home. We need to pay attention about that. And if Bukele wants to make it legal tender, there's more than just an investment. We need to dive deeper into this. And I started reading more books, and back then I was a huge fan of I think that's how my dad got attention of Bitcoin, because he's a huge fan of Max Kaiser. He has his show on RT.
Max demands attention, doesn't he? It's hard to ignore Max.
Exactly. So I think that's how it evolved naturally, and now we're here.
That's wicked, man. Yeah, it's nice when there's that moment where all the stars align, and it seems like there was like your sister and your dad and you were kind of on this discovery together. That's brilliant, man. That's really cool.
I think that's what accelerates everything, because it was not just me, which it's really odd, because normally in the Bitcoin rabbit hole journey, it's a lonely road, right? And then you start discovering another Bitcoiners, and that you feel aligned with them. But when you have your family that also know about that topic, you can talk about it like any other topic, like, I don't know, food or travel or whatever, right? So it's super awesome. Yeah.
I wonder how popular that is, where people, Bitcoiners, have the same kind of setup you have, or whether they're isolated within their close relationships, and Bitcoin is like they're a bit on the side, if you like.
Absolutely. Yeah,
but I'm constantly like talking about indirectly, I suppose, and sometimes directly. Well, more often than not now, actually, which is a good sign. I always somehow have Bitcoin in my conversations, whether it's I don't know, about anything political that's happening, or something that's happened in the neighborhood. You can always, that saying, all roads lead back to Bitcoin. I have like the kind of fundamentals and principles of the way I understand Bitcoin in my head, which has kind of altered the way I see the world and how things have come to be in this way because of fiat incentives. And I can then try and reverse, using you as an engineer, reverse engineer it in my head, what that is for me to learn from, in order to, understand a little bit more about how it plays out. So it's one of those fascinating. It's not a hobby. It's kind of like it just becomes a new lens that you don't want to take off, because when you have that lens in front of you, you are confronted with the reality, and reality is not always comfortable to see. Some of the things you just want to sort of take your sort of like lens, a Bitcoin lens off, and just like be that guy in the Matrix, eating the steak as if he's eating the real thing. But you're like lying to yourself, right? You're kind of, and I did that maybe last year. I had to take the lens off a little bit because I wanted to eat a bit of steak in the fiat world. But it does trap you quite quickly and easily. It's easy to fall back into it because everyone's doing the same thing at the same pace. You're familiar with the environment that people are trying to survive in, and you just slot right back in. So you've got to remain a little bit sort of like conscious and not overload your, proof of work, like over leverage your energy, I suppose, in Bitcoin, because you need to understand that you're still in a fiat world and there's still a fiat demand, and you've got to find balance, and that's not always easy to do. What about you?
I think hold on. I'm gonna ask you the question because otherwise,
ask me the question.
Yeah, but I'm gonna reply to you as well. But otherwise, I will forget. That is what is the most unexpected insight that you have gained from dive deeping into the Bitcoin space? I mean, in your podcast, so probably someone told you. Yeah. Cuando dejas tus activos digitales en un exchange o en custodia de alguien más, te expones a riesgos de terceros no deseados. A diferencia del sistema bancario tradicional, Bitcoin te permite tomar el control total de tus fondos utilizando tus propias claves privadas. Esto te permite ser soberano y esencialmente tu propio banco. Al tomar el control de tus Bitcoins, puedes evitar riesgos innecesarios de terceros. Almacenar tus Bitcoin en custodia de terceros, como los exchanges, puede exponerte a ataques de actores malintencionados, gobiernos o estafadores que lo único que quieren es apoderarse de tu dinero. Las billeteras de hardware aumentan la seguridad de tu billetera porque tus claves privadas se almacenan en un dispositivo especializado que no está siempre conectado al Internet. Como te he dicho antes, mantener tus claves almacenadas en un dispositivo en línea puede exponerte a factores adicionales de ataque, por lo que se recomienda usar una billetera de hardware al almacenar grandes cantidades de Bitcoin durante largos periodos de tiempo. Jade es una billetera de hardware no custodial para Bitcoins y Liquid que ofrece opciones de firma simple y firmas múltiples. Yo personalmente lo utilizo para almacenar mis Bitcoins, ya que me siento mucho más seguro manteniendo mis Bitcoins en una billetera fría que en una almacenada, por ejemplo, en mi teléfono. Si estás pensando en adquirir uno para ti, no olvides utilizar el código de descuento de nuestro show, BitCorner Podcast. De esta forma estarás apoyando directamente el show y además obtendrás un 10% de descuento para la compra de tu billetera fría.
Well, from my guests.
Exactly.
But I think what I've learned is that people what I've understood is that it's easy to project your idea of Bitcoin and sort of put that in someone else or on someone else as if they see the same Bitcoin you do. And it's quite present in the space now. There's a little bit of a skirmish going on amongst Bitcoiners. There's slaying of heroes going on around this Bitcoin core devs versus Bitcoin knots. And if you're an engineer, if you're not an engineer, you don't have the right to speak about engineering, and all that kind of stuff. And people are sort of suspicious of some of the authenticity behind some of the opinions that people who are quite influential in the space, how independent or influenced they are with their narratives and directions within Bitcoin. And this is something I was kind of vigilant about pretty much always, I think. And I assumed, probably wrongly from what I can see now, that people have sort of just assumed, and I hear this saying often in my podcast, but in others, like, you know, we might all disagree, but we're all Bitcoiners. We all agree on Bitcoin. It's quite clear we don't all agree on Bitcoin. How could we? Because we don't understand and see Bitcoin from the same lens and the same perspective and the same professional insights or skills that we have as individuals, right? And I'm sort of thinking, well, just because I've still chose to adopt Bitcoin, spend time in the space, try and contribute what I can. So, you know, I've got value, but only limited value. And I can contribute what I'm good at. And people will decide whether or not they want to listen or engage with that, which will give me feedback as to whether or not I'm good at it or not, you know, and how I can grow and develop or change and do something else. But people, I think, get lost in this not the rabbit hole, but they get lost down a particular sort of route or in a little part of the rabbit hole. And that's their kind of safe space that they want to stay in. But it's ignoring the bigger picture, you know. Go exploring in this rabbit hole, you know, don't just, you know, take in other people's value, because that will give you value in return, even if it's an uncomfortable truth, right? I respect the fact that I don't like to hear some of the things people say, and it makes me feel uncomfortable or it makes me doubt myself. But that's something that you can build on, right? And grow from, because you might, by sitting in that discomfort, change your mind. And if you've changed your mind, aren't you more closer to the overall truth than you were by not engaging with that discomfort? And there's a lot of people sort of like shit posting at each other, and that's going to happen. Of course it is. People they're just trying to drive engagement, or they're just sort of like, you know, getting involved in arguments just to sort of wind people up. And I respect Bitcoin for that, but it also frustrates me. Because you've got to try and find the signal amongst it all, you know? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, but and how do you start the Question in Bitcoin podcast?
Well, it's the Rabbit Hole Stories podcast, but so it's me and Joel. So it's just me and Joel. We were just sort of at the London Bitcoin meetup a few times, and you know, we got to be friends. And we wanted to like do something. I wanted to do something. He wanted to do something. And then we were just sort of like, let's just meet up in the pub next weekend and just spitball some ideas and see what we're good at and see what we can come up with. So we thought I would just do like a podcast, call it Rabbit Hole Stories, and then have it as an archive of people's discovery of Bitcoin. So we like say, you know, tell us your Bitcoin rabbit hole story. What's your origin story? And then we just open the floor up. Then it's not sort of structured. It's not pre-prepared questions or anything like that. Because we wanted a space where people can bring themselves and sort of like reveal a little bit about their insights of Bitcoin, what their interests are, what their sort of whatever they want to talk. We'll just go with it, like we're doing right now. And, you know, it's been really valuable because it connects people to other people. People realize that they've got similar interests or ideas and perspectives outside of Bitcoin as much as in. And it's a great way just to, like, you can go onto Rabbit Hole Stories and just sort of like type in, if, you know, a guest or sort of go through it. And it might be like 2 years old, but the Rabbit Hole Story is always going to remain the same. You know, people's opinions, obviously, 2 years ago about Bitcoin and things are likely to have changed. I've hoped, because like, if you haven't changed your opinion in a couple of years, then, you know, but so you should take really watching these Rabbit Hole Stories, you know, take it, at the time it was recorded, right? And then you can be like, oh, that was 2 years ago. What was happening in Bitcoin 2 years ago for this to be a discussion? And that helps you sort of then discover, you know, the history a little bit of Bitcoin as well. So that was really the idea about why we started it. So it's not something that we can constantly drive to get the numbers up and stuff. It's very low key, you know, and if and when we can do it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I feel the same way with the pod, because when I started, I was thinking like, of course, as you mentioned, it's not the same, your same thoughts or opinions from 2 years ago. So I was thinking like, if I do the podcast, how long it's gonna last? The opinions, the insights, and all the information about it, right? Because at the same time, there was not a Salvadorian podcast about Bitcoin. So back then. Now there's emerging a few, and we need more. So I encourage you guys, if you're Salvadorian, to keep doing this.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so I was like, should it be like technical, not technical? Also, should it be about news? And I was like, all right, there's. So I'm not a journalist. So I'm not good at asking questions about news or what's going on, trending, whatever. But then I was like, all right, there's something that is lacking. It's a lot of information about Bitcoin, especially in Spanish. The technical stuff, the technical in a not a technical way, right? So there's a blue ocean here that we can explore, and that's how it started, right? Because then I thought, all right, if as the same as your podcast, if someone goes and back then and from 2 years an episode from 2 years ago and listen or watch an episode, probably as I just said, the opinions and thoughts probably will change, but the core information about what is Bitcoin, all the technical parts and whatever, it will remain the same because Bitcoin is like that. You cannot change its core fundamental values and structure and technology, right? But the way that you perceive it or you have learned that will change. So yeah, I think that's the beauty of the podcast. You can learn a lot, like in yours or mine or whichever podcast that focus on that, right? On the deeper stories.
Yeah, totally. And like, look, no one's always right every time, all the time. You know, I'm always wrong, and I'm sometimes right all at the same time.
It's good to be wrong.
yeah, and like it was also good for people to tell me I'm wrong, because I can either be like, yeah, I am, thanks for letting me know, or I can defend it by saying no and rationalize it. So it does create like opportunity for engagement and learning. Mate, it would be boring being right all the time. How arrogant would you be? But I do think there are people out there that do genuinely believe that they are right, full stop, right?
Yeah.
But you can't help that.
Yeah. By the way, how do you orange peel people if you had the opportunity to orange peel someone or to start a conversation about Bitcoin?
I was on a mission, I suppose, 2 years ago, just to sort of like trying to bring the subject into a conversation, but it was ineffective, and people switched off, and people responded differently, either having their like, comments that were just sort of echoed amongst, what you would expect, the things that you hear or they might have heard on the radio or TV or something. They're just echoing this narrative that it tells me that they've got no idea what Bitcoin is, and B, I have to now break through this barrier of them just believing this one thing that they don't even understand. So I've moved away from that. I used to be like the person, I used to go and meet people where they're at, if they've complaining about something or they're struggling with something, try and sort of like drive engagement with that. But that's also unhelpful, because people are like, don't rescue me in this way. So all I do now really is just show up as myself. I use Bitcoin to understand myself better, be self-aware, emotionally mature than I used to be. And that's because Bitcoin has incentivized me to do that, I suppose. And that's what I feel and tell myself. So with that, I can arrive as evidence and be more insightful about things that they're bringing to the table, whether it's, the economy, politics, whatever it may be, I can show up knowing what they're saying, but also offer not Bitcoin, but I can give them a bit of a landscape about what they're dealing with, so they can see it better.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm providing space for them rather than me meeting them where they're at. So that's how I try to approach it now.
That's cool. That's awesome. Uh, Another question that I want to ask is about the UK. What is the context of UK and Bitcoin? What is the relationship between them?
Oh man, I don't even know where to start. I don't think you're ready for my explanation, but I'll keep it. Yeah, it's pretty shit. UK is the shitcoin casino of the world, right? Bearing in mind that all this fiat nonsense, UK was pretty much the birth of this monster. So I do apologise to the rest of the world, and it's expanded and morphed into all these sort of ugly things, including wars and all that sort of stuff. But in the UK, right, the way that it works here, the culture that is offered to us in our education,
Yeah.
is essentially, it's Great Britain. British values is a big thing that is put upon us. What are the values of being British? When really it's just a guise for we are, moral. We are, better in a way. But then people start to realize that there's this cost of living crisis. It's, there's this culture, class wars always going on and struggle. And people then, with that pride that they have, try to then fight off the other people or the others who are the problem. And it just becomes this kind of fight between many different camps, whether it's class, the neighborhoods that are more wealthier than others,
Mm-hmm.
people who are claiming social benefits from the government because, they're working class and all that sort of stuff. So it just blends this culture of resentment and sort of passive aggressiveness. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really selling UK well. It's a beautiful place. The weather is unpredictable. There's so many different.
Yeah.
There's so many different beautiful historic places that go back thousands of years. So you can go to places where there's a building that's been stood there for many hundreds of years. There's thousands of years old sort of relics. So it does have a deep sort of history of like early civilization. And that kind of arrives with this kind of thing is like, we've got this long ancient history, and it just
Mm-hmm.
adds to that kind of, entitlement, I suppose.
Yeah. So it's very complex
Yeah, and we've got
story.
this guy called Gary's Economics out there now. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's annoying and he
No.
sort of insists on his presence everywhere.
Oh, really?
He's a millionaire. He comes across as working class. All right, mate. Yeah, blah blah blah. I grew up
Uh-huh.
poor, but he made his millions doing trading during a financial crisis.
Uh-huh.
In Citibank, he was a trader at Citibank,
Ah. Uh-huh.
and realized the horrible side of it. So he's essentially saying fiat money is bad, and then came
Mm-hmm.
out to be the people's economist to say the problem is the rich people at the top. We need to tax them because they're responsible for it, and completely misses the point about the impact that will have and what drives the cost of living crisis and the housing prices to go up so
Yeah.
high that it prices people out. So he's like spinning up, or he's getting people wound up about the problem, which is real, right? But he tries to sell them this solution of like, if we got the government to tax the rich, then you would be better off. And then people really sort of like get behind that because, of course, they want something from what they feel that they've been robbed of because that's what he's saying. And it just creates this kind of resentment then that incentivizes the government to sort of take more and more of everyone else's tax, right? And it just
Yeah.
sort of compounds the problem. So yeah, we're in a little bit of point in our history in Britain where, things aren't great. Things have become unaffordable. Like a small little bedroom, a 2-bedroom flat in central London, you're looking at just under £1 million
Just like
for
here in
nothing.
Barcelona as well.
Yeah, it's like, mate, that's crazy. How could this box be worth this amount of money? So obviously people are being pushed to the edge a little bit. And it'd be interesting to see how it plays out over the next few years.
Yeah, and I think it's global because, and it's part of the thesis actually of Lawrence Lepard. The thing is that now it's an everything bubble, and it comes with the dollar, right? So the dollar comes, it's really attached because it's the currency of the world right now. So if that's inflated, everything will be afraid.
Yeah. And like, obviously with the US dollar being the world reserve currency, and things are happening, changing geopolitically at the moment with tariffs and stuff. So the world is going through a little bit of a big shift at the moment. Some people might call it the fourth turn-in or whatever, but it's certainly bubbling at the surface. Are you calling it fourth turn-in?
Well, not here, but I have heard that term.
Yeah.
Mostly because of the podcast and
Yeah. So we're living in interesting times, right? Is that all I could say?
Mm-hmm. What is and now I want to know about your perspective, or well, if you want to share, if you have heard from the people of the UK about the perspective about El Salvador and everything that's going on, not just Bitcoin related, but in general. I always like to ask my guests if they have some insights or opinions about it.
About El Salvador?
Yeah, it's a Salvadorian podcast, so people, my audience, it's
almost mate. First of all, I've got to say, from what I've seen, El Salvador is a stunningly beautiful place. Like,
you should go, man.
Yeah, no, I will go, and it's definitely in my plans to do that. Everything I've seen, everyone seems so friendly, so welcoming. And obviously a lot of the sort of podcasts that I see, like Joe Nakamoto, when he goes out there and stuff like that, and what he's done recently, I don't know if you saw it, he went to the Bitcoin beach, and he was talking about how Bitcoin's growing there. And there are some issues with Bitcoin being accepted at all places. But what you do see is a huge development around that area. And that's obviously the Bitcoin is driving that development as well. And obviously there are some things to work out in relation to that, because, you got to negotiate how that looks. But it's positive to see the direction that El Salvador is going in. The media over here, like the UK, if I switch on the great big indoctrination news channel that is the BBC, El Salvador is pretty much sold as a place where there's this huge prison. They acknowledge that the crime rate has like gone down to whatever percent, which is positive. But what they focus on is it's come at the cost of people being put in this huge prison under these horrible conditions, and that can't be right. So you put into this kind of, he must be a dictator then, and all that sort of stuff. And people are so easy over here to sort of like come to an assumption without them being explicitly told about it, which is quite manipulative. But I'd love to come out, and it'll probably be next year. But I really want to spend time there. I don't want to just go to like Bitcoin Beach and then piss off back home to the UK. I want to spend some quality time there. It seems like there's some sort of like it's the adoption of Bitcoin and people accepting it seems to sort of be a struggle But I don't know if you can tell me if that's true or not.
It's true, but it's not like the media share it, right? It's of course it's not 100%, but it's not a few. The thing is that I don't know exactly what the war in general expected, that making it legal tender that everyone will accept it by default, right? But it's quite interesting, and I know why it's not accepted. It's not because of Bitcoin per se. It's because, or at least that's how I perceive it, is because in El Salvador back then we had colones. That was our currency. That was before the 2000s. It was in the 90s. But in the 2000s, I think 2001, one of the presidents make the dollars legal tender. So because we were not hyperinflated, but we were in the road of being hyperinflated at some point, right? So he wanted to prevent that back then. But what happened is that, of course, back then the value of the colone was around $1. It was 8.75 colones. So imagine your savings being divided by 9. So I remember my grandparents, my granddads and my grandma.
Wow.
They have I mean, they didn't have enterprises or whatever, but they have a decent nest egg and savings for the rest of the life, and then suddenly just to see your savings divided by 9, just rip it up.
Mate, that's craziness.
Yeah. So, but anyways, that's the story of El Salvador, and there's a big rabbit hole. But in the end, people is accepting it. That's why this podcast exists. There's a lot of efforts there, and like Mi Primer Bitcoin, Old Nation, and so on and so forth. Now they're launching this new book that it's What is Money, that Lina Sage made with that little hodler, and there's a lot of effort.
Oh yeah, nice.
Yeah, so we're gonna start wrapping up because we need to continue this madness in this conference. But before leaving, you know that I told you there's a little game podcast that my previous guest had a question for my next.
I'm anxious to know. Go on.
Yeah, so that will be the last question for the podcast. And don't leave, guys, because this is just starting. We are in the middle of a conference. So yeah, I'm gonna share the questions. This is a huge one. My previous guest was Lawrence Leppard. So
no pressure
at all. All right, so here it is. Let me share with you really quick. Here it is.
I think the most interesting question that you can ask Bitcoiners is, how do they see it unfolding in the next 5 or 10 years? I think we all have different views. I mean, I think Samson thinks we're going to $1 million tomorrow, and I think it's probably going to take 5 to 7 years. And I think everybody has a different perspective on the timeline, and I think all Bitcoiners understand that what we're talking about is happening, and it's kind of inevitable. It's kind of baked in the cake. I mean, in the same way that the internet spread, Bitcoin's going to spread. Everybody's going to, in some time frame, we're all going to be Bitcoiners. So I don't think there's much debate about that amongst the hardcore Bitcoiners, but I think there's a lot of debate, and it's healthy debate, and it's interesting to hear people's perspectives on what's the timeline, what are the key events, how does it unfold, and will we ever get to a whole Bitcoin standard? I mean, I strongly believe that my kids, or certainly my grandkids, they'll kind of look at the dollar. It'll be like this antique thing that everybody used to use. And now, things will be priced in Satoshis. In dollar terms, I'm not sure what a Satoshi will be worth, but, a car will have a Satoshi price, and a hamburger will have a Satoshi price, and everything will be priced in Satoshis. And so I think that's inevitable. But in my lifetime, I don't know. I mean, it could be 40 years from now. I'm not sure, but I think that's where we're going. And I'm always interested when almost everyone I speak to in Bitcoin land, I kind of say, hey, give me your perspective. What do you think the timeline is on this? So I would ask your next guest, I would say, hey, what's your timeline for, full Bitcoin adoption, for all priced in Satoshis and fiat has failed? And I think that would be a very interesting question.
Mate, that is an interesting question. We should have a whole episode on answering that question.
Yeah, but this is the last question, so let's wrap it up.
First of all, what a beautiful guy. What a lovely guy.
He's
I'm looking
amazing.
forward to reading his book. And I don't know. I struggle with that one. I struggle with that one because sometimes I get excited. Sometimes I'd be like, but then I think, that's too soon. I think realistically, it's going to be like 30 years before really it established itself and starts to solidify. But I really do think within the next sort of 10 years, it will be so recognizable that people would understand that you can pay in it if you wanted to, and more people will be. And that will just start driving the sort of inevitability of Bitcoin. Then I'll start. I do think there will be a tension in a time where people will be resistant to that. Peter Schiff, for example, will always be resistant to it. But for example, there'll be people that really sort of don't want it to happen, maybe through their ignorance or that they're benefiting from the fiat system. But it will just be TikTok next block, get out the fucking way, Bitcoin don't care. That's what I think. But that's a whole sort of episode in of itself, so I'm going to restrain myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, we should continue. Thank you for stopping by. Thank you for stopping by, not just in the podcast, but in the conference. 100% I'm going to invite you. Also with Joel, it will be interesting to make an episode, the three of us. That will be cool.
That'd be brilliant. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Thank you very much for stopping by. And guys, don't leave because we're continuing. But yeah, if you're not watching the conference, then see you next week. But
ciao, guys.
That's it for the ciao.